A few weeks ago, I saw a Facebook post from actress Sanaa Lathan. I've followed Miss Lathan for a while now because she was in one of the most significant movies of all time, in my estimation. More on that later. Miss Lathan put up a story from Huffington Post titled, "Why I'm Tired of Seeing White People on the Screen." The article was about the need for diversity in movies. Of course, diversity is just a code word for we need white people to put more black people in movies. And this exercise in futility illustrates perfectly why black people haven't made any progress in most areas of American life, especially the movies. And it's most disappointing that Miss Lathan would be at the center of a conversation about that, especially considering her pedigree. In my opinion, Sanaa Lathan starred in one of the most significant movies of all time. Now, while most people know her from the Best Man series of movies, I first saw Miss Lathan in a different franchise. Actually, one of the first dual franchises, Alien vs. Predator. This movie marked the first time, to my knowledge, a black female was the lead in a major big-budget corporate franchise action film. Even though it was 25 years after Sigourney Weaver set the standard for females in action movies, we finally had a black female engaged in such a prominent role. Of course, Hollywood stuffed the concept after that, and we haven't seen a black female in such a role since. Meanwhile, Miss Lathan is posting articles throwing shade on the myriad of white females like Scarlett Johansson who've risen to prominence since Miss Lathan's Aliens movie. Now, I don't blame Miss Lathan for being critical. It's extremely obvious what white Hollywood is doing by diminishing the role of non-white and particularly black actors. It's a real problem. But then again, it's been a real problem. It's been a problem since before Kodak perfected the film process. At the beginning of the 20th century, whites were 92% of the American population and 100% of the money in Hollywood. So simple math would explain why practically all the movies starred and featured whites. But at the beginning of the 21st century, whites are less than 70% of the population. So social math would seem to dictate we would be seeing far more of the best roles going to non-white people. But instead, the numbers haven't moved. That's because whites may be only 2/3 of the population, but they are still 100% of the money in Hollywood. So even if the audience is raising an eyebrow at what they see on the screen, it really won't matter because the audience is powerless to stop it or change it. The audience might prefer to see something different, but the decision of what you will actually see rests with the people who pay for the film. While black people have been endlessly decrying how white media companies have made a concerted effort to erase us from television and movies, we wail year after year of how we're snubbed at the Grammys, forgotten at the Emmys, and outright ethnically cleansed at the Oscars. And when we do show up at the Oscars, it's always as someone's slave or servant. White Hollywood isn't even trying to hide their utter contempt for us anymore. It's been over a century of filmmaking, and their determination to remain at the top of the ladder hasn't changed, even though the metrics in society clearly no longer justify such absolute dominance. They don't care about the numbers in society. They only care about the numbers in the bank. And even if the white population goes down to 10% tomorrow morning, you will still only see whites in your movies and television because at the end of the day, you can't expect white men and white corporations to take the dollars they got from white customers for white films and then decide to spend them for black people's benefit. They might throw a few dimes your way, but at the end of the day, they didn't build these companies for black empowerment. They built them for their own. And all our attempts to shame and nag them into altering their totalitarian, Eurocentric exercise of power hasn't made one iota of change. So today, I'm telling you, stop trying. It's never worked, and it never will. Because black people may have a predisposition to work against our own best interests, but white supremacy does not. Simply put, we have no excuses for accepting the subservient position in media that we have. After Alex Haley, Sam Greenlee, Ivan Dixon, Spike Lee, and others, we've had a clear roadmap of what we need to do. and whining for yet another 100 years about white Hollywood continuing to exercise white power in the interests of white people isn't going to change that. Let's stop complaining about white Hollywood and start focusing on black Hollywood. But in the last century, that's failed to happen. Why? The first problem is that most of us think that people in Hollywood are somehow different from those of us in the rest of society, and that's simply not the case. Most black people have completely outsourced the concept of building an economy. We've adopted an employee mindset that says all the heavy lifting of developing ideas, budgets, and financing should be left up to whites, and the only obligation we as blacks have is to figure out a way to get them to give us a piece of a job in their machine. This backward thinking is obsolete. We see this holdover mentality from slavery in everyday black citizens, and I'm telling you that the average black actor in Hollywood is no different. They're perfectly content to take the crumbs that these movie houses they endlessly whine about discriminating against them flick off the table so they can go and buy a handbag or an expensive sports car. They'll floss on MTV or some gossip website, and they have no problem with white supremacy at all. Until they can't get another crumb flicked at them. Then it's off to scream bloody murder. I say, forget the crumbs. It's time for us to take the whole pie. So why haven't we done it? First, as I explained, the average black actor isn't looking for power. They're simply looking for a job. Secondly, we don't actually have faith that we can do what the white studios are doing. Most black people who get involved in media are completely unable to script compelling dialogue, an interesting story, or build strong characters. In other words, most black people who get involved in entertainment don't take the time or effort to actually learn and excel at their craft. Not in writing, not in directing, not in cinematography, and not in acting. So it's very hard to feel confident to challenge people who have mastered the art of filmmaking when you know in your heart that you haven't. And most black people in Hollywood know they haven't. Lastly, we have a false idea of what it means to challenge them. You can't complain about white studios making a movie like Lucy or Mission Impossible if you are flatly refusing to make your own. You can't complain that none of the comic book movies have any black heroes if, once again, you've outsourced that responsibility to Marvel and DC. Black people have to start making the kinds of movies they complain they can't get hired on. All that black people are producing on their own right now are self-stereotyping hood drug dealer movies and dysfunctional relationship films. We haven't demonstrated one scintilla of ability to make a major action film or a sci-fi thriller worth watching. But we'll shout to the heavens if white people make one, but don't hire us for it. So why is it we don't see more expansive movies from black creators? I believe the biggest reason is because most blacks in Hollywood are one-trick ponies. They may know how to direct, but they know nothing about cost-effective ways to do special effects or to put together large set pieces. Meanwhile, white indie filmmakers are doing full-blown zombie movies for $250,000, and Gareth Edwards, who was actually just a computer special effects guy, made his debut film, Monsters, for only $900,000. But we have black actors and black actresses who claim to be worth over $10 million walking out of expensive department stores with overpriced handbags. There went your movie money. At the risk of offending by telling a lady's age, Sana Lathan is 42 years old, which means she's actually slightly older than I am. And that means she remembers, just like I do, when we were children. Back then, Hollywood was breaking its arm patting itself on the back over the special effects from movies like Star Wars and Star Trek. Those movies today seem downright primitive in comparison, but only if you're comparing special effects. Taken as a whole, those movies stand up extremely well against the films of today. The original Star Wars continues to be a blockbuster even with most of its original special effects left in place unchanged. And that brings me back to why Miss Lathan never did another sci-fi action film. If those movies were good enough for George Lucas and Paramount back then, Why isn't that type of filmmaking good enough for us today? Remember all the ships from Star Wars? They were all miniatures, filmed against a blue screen and rigged with explosives to make them blow up during action scenes. Remember the Enterprise from the Captain Kirk Star Trek movies? Same thing. Nakatomi Plaza from the first Die Hard? Same thing. RoboCop, Total Recall, Terminator 2? All the same thing. Oh yeah, and one more. Sana Lathan's predecessor in the Aliens movies, Sigourney Weaver, had films using miniatures like the ones of this ship crashing in this shot. These techniques could all be done far more cheaply today with digital equipment. There are plenty of indie filmmakers out there, black or otherwise, who could take a $3 million budget and make it look like a $30 million special effects extravaganza. Granted, it wouldn't be as flashy as what you see from the summer blockbusters, but the truth is, all the big budget movies don't impress people anymore, because all movies are about, basically, a story. And the major film studios are now trying to hide their lack of a story behind huge special effects. And it's not working. If you don't have huge special effects, that just means you should concentrate more on your story. The audience will recognize and appreciate that unlike major Hollywood films, yours is actually putting forward an honest effort to tell a good story, which is ultimately what people watch a movie for in the first place. I'd also remind you that when Bruce Lee came to Hollywood and couldn't get the types of roles that he wanted, he went back to China, and his people concentrated on dominating 100% of the Chinese movie market, not 20% of the American movie market. I don't know what Miss Lathan plans to do in the next 5 years, but it's been 10 years since she did Alien vs. Predator, and if she told them she was interested in doing more movies like it, apparently they aren't returning her phone calls. So she can choose to do something different and get together with some of her pals who have $1 million, create their own character, do a ton of social networking to gain an audience, and see about putting their own film that will actually be starring the actors they want to see. Or she can spend the next 10 years like the last 10 years, hoping that white Hollywood will decide to finally cede more power, even when it makes no sense for them to do so.